I've been a busy boy the last couple of weeks. My other life, the one that you don't get to see, as a regional director and being a board member for a couple of national boards, I was in the Dominican Republic for almost a week, celebrating Mission Store 75th anniversary. I would like to tell you it was a vacation. It was not. I got to sit on the beach for less than an hour, but I'm glad to be done with that. And then I had to fly to Denver, and I was out there for the National Conservative Baptist Association board meetings, to which this church belongs. And I'll tell you what, I am happy to be back in Pennsylvania. The older I get, the less I like sitting in a cramped airplane on lawn chairs at my size for multiple hours at a time. And hello to that little person too. Glad you're here. So, happy Independence Weekend. This is a great weekend. It's a great thing to celebrate, and I was glad to see you all celebrate it as we did. Marie and I were talking before the service started, and she said, do you realize that if things had been different and God had not ordered my life the way he did, that I would still be in the Ukraine today with all that's going on there? And I thought about that for a minute, and I said to Marie, I agree. If things were different and my German family were still in Germany, I wouldn't be here because my grandmother was a German Jewish woman. So it's only God's blessing and his sovereignty that we're all here and that we're in this country and able to celebrate what we do. I'm going to borrow one of your music stands and annoy everybody like I do every week by changing around what's here, because my notepad will not sit correctly on that. So it's great to be back here again. We're going to pick up in the study that we started. We started the last time I was here on a study of Nehemiah, and it'll be a 4-part series. And we started looking at Nehemiah because this church does not parallel what was going on at the time of Nehemiah, which is several hundred years before Christ was here. Just to recap this very briefly, Israel as a country that you remember from the Old Testament, at that point had ceased to exist. It was conquered by the superpower of the time, King Artaxerxes. All those people are still over there, Iraq, Iran, they were ancient civilizations, and at this point in time, different people have come in after Israel's civil war, after King Solomon lived and his kids made a mess of things. Israel has not been its own country for several hundred years, short hundreds of years, at the time that we're studying Nehemiah. Nehemiah is one of the Jewish kids that never knew his homeland. He was never born there. Generations before, the conquering powers came in and they stripped the country bare. They took anything that was valuable. They stripped out the temple and all the gold that was in the temple. They looted the national treasury and took everything. And they took the best and the brightest of all the kids. All the young people that were the best and brightest, they took them back to Babylon or to Nineveh or to those cities that were 600-700 miles from there. And the best and the brightest were put into service as basically indentured servitude. In other words, they were slaves in everything but name. One of them, Nehemiah, was probably really talented and came to the attention of the officials of that day. And he ends up being the king's right-hand man. The king, the reigning superpower, King Artaxerxes. He winds up being his right-hand man, and his official title is cupbearer. We don't use words like that anymore. But what that meant in that day is he was the one that would have to drink everything the king was being served and eat everything the king was being served to make sure that the king was not being poisoned by another group that wanted to take over his throne. So Nehemiah's job was to be the personal bodyguard in every way that you can think of and take the bullet for the king. That was his job. Because of his proximity to the king all the time, he became probably the most trusted confidant of the king. He's a Jewish kid. He's not really a kid. He's a young man, and he's never known his homeland. Not once, not ever. He's never been back there. In his lifetime, there have been 2 major groups of people that the king allowed to leave that country and go back to the ancestral homeland. They were regatherings, and they were hundreds, if not small thousands, of Jewish people that made their way back to the ancestral homeland. And it's a wreck. One of them, in the second return, was Nehemiah's brother, Hananiel. He goes back, and he goes back to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is laid waste. Not only has it been plundered, and anything that was worth anything was stripped out of the whole place, but they wrecked it. They pulled down the walls, they wrecked the temple. The invading armies wrecked the place, not unlike Ukraine right now, where Marie's ancestry comes from. You go over there now in some of those hundreds and hundreds of year-old cities, and they're bombed to smithereens. The same thing happened in Germany. The same thing happened in all big wars. It's a shame, and it's one of the reasons why we're all glad to be here today, safe, and in this room together, worshiping God freely and without people running in the front door. Or worse yet, like they have done, locking the doors of the church with us in it, and then setting fire to it. That happens in many parts of the world. It's happening right now. I mean, right now as I speak. In Africa, there are places where they gather to worship, and the authorities come and lock them in and burn the building with them in it. Isn't that awful? I'm not here today to talk about how awful human beings can be with one another. They are. We always are. We always will be. It's why we needed Jesus, our Savior. It's why we'll celebrate that in a few minutes here with this table. But at this point of the story, the third return of people from this faraway place, this ruling superpower, Nehemiah is one of them, because his brother had said, hey, you got to come look at our capital city, Jerusalem. It's in ruins. It's a disgrace for those of us who are Jewish. I mean, this was the center of our worship. And we are a disgrace to all of the countries all around, because we once were great. Hundreds of years before was King David and King Solomon, and we had everything, and we were the ruling power in our part of the world. People came to us because they admired how we ran our country. People came to us because our king was wise, wiser than any man who ever lived. Foreign kings and queens came to see what God had blessed us with. And now it's all in ruins. And so Nehemiah, with the king's permission, and better yet, the king's money, and a battalion of people to protect him from the military, and purchase orders for all kinds of building materials that they would need. With the king's permission, Nehemiah comes back. He and his brother hook up, and they survey this city that's in ruins. And an idea is born in Nehemiah's head, which quickly is explained to a tight group of people all around him, including his brother. And the plan was, let's rebuild these walls. Let's get these walls back up and get this city up and running once again. We're studying that right now. We're studying what it means. I know this is dusty ancient history, but we're studying what this means and how God showed up and showed off his great power for them. And I'm using that as a platform to say, we are not a ruined Jerusalem here in this church, far from it. This is the little engine that could, this church. And I'm proud of you all for keeping all this going from October till now. God bless you all for that. May he multiply your tribe so we can expect a lot of babies born this time next year. And thank you for this one that's here. God bless you all for doing what you're doing. You are not Jerusalem in ruins, but there's lessons we can learn from what they did and what we have to do here going forward, right? Yes? Nod your head, so we're not here till 1 o'clock. Pastor Ron, you can talk as long as you want. About 40 minutes from now, we're going to get up and walk out and say goodbye. So, this is the second installment. Last week where we started was Nehemiah looking around saying, somebody ought to do something about this. And God tapped him on the shoulder and said, yeah, Nehemiah, it's going to be you. It's going to be you and this close-knit group of people. Your brother's going to help. Some people from Babylon are going to come and help. But the people that are here, this tight group of people, you're going to be the ones that are going to do it. And Nehemiah, you're going to lead it. Now, some of you have told me that you're reading the book of Nehemiah right now. I wish you would. That's a good thing, because we have 2 more after this day. So, read that book. But also read the book of Ezra. They're right next to each other. Ezra is a priest. He's a contemporary of Nehemiah. And so the story is really complete, the whole story of how they returned to worshiping God together in Jerusalem, if you read both. So I suggest that you do that. So today, what we're going to be looking at, as soon as I get the clicker out of my pocket, and you know what else I should do, Bert? I should probably turn on my microphone, right? None of you had any trouble hearing me, though, did you? No, except maybe the back row. So now you can hear me even more. So today, what we're going to be looking at is this. This is Nehemiah and his team. They dream the work, they plan the work, and they will do the work. And except for the fact that this church is still a thriving thing going on, you're not Jerusalem in ruins, there's a good lesson for us to learn. So we're going to unpeel that today just a little bit. And I'm going to take us to Nehemiah chapter 1 and chapter 2, and I'm going to read selected verses. They'll be coming up on the wall. If you brought your devices, you can read along with me when we get there, or if you brought your Bible, you can do that too, or you can read it off the wall with me. I'll be reading it out of the New Living Translation just because it's kind of fun to read in a different translation than what we're normally used to. I grew up with King James, probably like many of you, so if you have a KJV, go ahead and use it. If you have an NIV, go ahead and use it. If you have an IRS, CIA, BVD, I don't care what version, read along with us or read it off the wall. The first thing that we see about Nehemiah dreaming the work and then planning the work and then doing the work, just like we have to do here to get ready for your next pastor, the first thing that we see is that he seeks God seriously. And I would challenge all of us to continue doing that. I'm not asking you to do it because you haven't been doing it. I'm asking you to continue doing that. There are prayer groups of 3, I believe they are, maybe they're a little bigger, that are still meeting to pray for all of this. Hey, I got a helper. Hi, little man. He's coming to see Marie. So I'm asking you to continue seeking God seriously, and you can be part of that prayer, those prayer teams. I know there's a handful of them. See Terry about who they are or what they are, or Diane, and they'll get you hooked up. That's a great way to keep seeking God seriously. And you're at a point in your church life. It's been since October since you've had to look at this ugly face and 1 or 2 other ugly faces, including Jim Dalton, who came back. I called him last month and I said, hey, how would you like to come back here one day and do this again? And I hope you enjoyed him 2 weeks ago when he was here. I know he was anxious to see all of you once again. So the first thing that Nehemiah does when he's got to do an impossible task, we're not talking about building stone walls around a city. We're not talking about stone walls around a city. We're talking about walls that are 20, 30 feet high, and they are many feet at their base. We're talking serious walls here that need to be rebuilt. And all of the different gates, and by a gate, I don't mean the gate that you have maybe at your house with your little fence around the front lawn. I mean a gate that is probably 25 doors, a pair of doors that are 25 feet high on wrought iron hinges and hardware. It takes a couple of people to open them, if not more. All this is going to be rebuilt by these guys to half its height in less than 3 months. So we ought to pay attention, because we don't have rebuilding to do here, but we do have work to do here. And seeing that new pastor come in is a big one. So he seeks God seriously, and I'm asking all of you to continue doing that. And here's where this comes from. Here's the first chapter, and the first verse, and then the second chapter and first verse. These are the memoirs of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah. In late autumn, in the month of Kislev, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, I was at the fortress of Susa. This is that city, the capital city of this ruling power that took over Israel. I was in the fortress of Susa early the following spring, in the month of Nisan. This is nice that he names these back then names of the months of the year. These different names that we have. They correspond to what we have, but this is how we can locate exactly when this all happened. Nice touch there by Nehemiah. The following spring, in the month of Nisan, during the 20th year of King Artaxerxes' reign, I was serving the king his wine. I had never before appeared sad in his presence. Now, why is that important? That the number 2 guy, who's the most trusted by the king, because he's eating the food and drinking the king's wine and water and whatever else. Why is it important for him not to be sad in the king's presence? You and I can't relate to any of this. You know why? Because we don't have a king. Back then, kings were the absolute final authority on everything. Most of them, in this part of the world, in this time, were pagan kings. They ruled by their pagan gods. And they made the rules up as they went along. They made up the punishment as they went along. And they did what they pleased, and no one could challenge them. So, one of the infractions with many of the kings of that time was, you are forbidden to ever be sad in my presence. I don't want a bunch of sad faces that I want to look at. It's why there were court jesters and people that amuse the king all day long in certain cultures, right? It was a bad thing to be sad in the presence of the king. And if you were, and he took displeasure with you, they could and they would off with your head. I mean, kings had a power that frightens us even now. It's why our country said to King George III over 200 years ago, we are declaring ourselves free and independent of you. We're going to form our own country now. We are declaring our independence from you. When we come to this weekend as a country, do you realize that we're celebrating something far greater probably than we can appreciate, but do you understand that it's only a beginning for our country? We're saying to the King of England, on whose ground he had claimed he owned, we were saying to him, we shall be free and independent. King of England had a different idea, didn't he? He said, oh, no, you're not. Oh, no, you're not. And he sent troops over here, lots of them, thousands of them. And we fought a big war. And of course, God blessed that idea that we could be free and have liberty and pursue the Lord our God as we saw fit, however we saw fit. God blessed this country to become free and independent from England. That's a history lesson for free. But do you realize today what we celebrate, what we'll celebrate on Tuesday, but this whole week, we're celebrating a beginning. Just because you declare yourself free and independent doesn't mean it's going to be so, because no king is going to take that lying down. And this king, back then with Nehemiah, wasn't going to take lying down anybody who was sad in his presence. It's why Nehemiah mentions this. He mentions it because, although he had not been sad, he's close enough to the king that the king knows something's off with you, Nehemiah. Something's got you preoccupied. There's a look on your face. And I don't think the king was determined to kill Nehemiah. I don't think he was determined to punish him. He noticed that something was off with Nehemiah. And what was off was Nehemiah was brokenhearted about what was going on in his ancestral homeland. and the capital city. And God had put on his heart to do something about it. He wasn't one of those guys or girls who looked at something and said, somebody ought to do something about that. He looked at it and said, God, what do you want me to do? And God said, I want you to rebuild these walls. Okay, so here we are. He seeks God seriously, and he does so at risk. The next thing that he does is he refines and defines the vision very clearly. The king asks, well, how can I help you? With a prayer to the God of heaven. Remember, it's the king and he can do whatever he wants. So Nehemiah, with a prayer to God in heaven, says, if it please the king, and if you are pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried. This is a really cheeky thing to ask for. He's several hundred miles away. He has to travel through territory that hate Jewish people to begin with, and some of that territory hates the ruling superpower. Like all conquered countries that were under the thumb of communist Russia back in that day, they hated that too. Nehemiah has to travel through hundreds of miles through this kind of territory. He needs the king's blessing to do this. He's going to need the king's money. He's going to need the king's army. He's going to need the king's resources to do what he's got to do. He's got a good enough relationship with the king that he can ask. And because of his service, while still representing the Lord his God really well, the king grants his request to do that. So he seeks God seriously. He refines and defines the vision clearly. When I was here 3 Sundays back now, I met with your leadership team, and our exercise that night was to come up with a very compact, all-in-one paragraph description of what this church is and who you really are. And what they came up with is, we are a small community church that is deeply engaged with our community, who loves the Word of God and believes that it is our sole and only authority for doctrine, faith, and practice. And we follow Jesus and want to train others to do that too. Now, that's not exactly what was all written down. That's the compaction of it. Diane, if you're listening, that's probably not a bad way to go. So you have to define what it is that you're aiming at. And the reason I asked them to go through that exercise is because you're going to have a new pastor here one day, and he's going to want to know who you are, what you think you are. And being able to have a pretty handy answer is a good thing, because just like you're looking at him and where he came from and his references and his bride, and just like you're looking at that, guess what? They're looking at you, and they want to know something of you. And so that's why it pays, and you're doing it. You are refining and defining who you are. And the next step will be to clarify your vision further going forward into the future. You're going to do that together with your new pastor, but you can't get started on it now. You know why? Because guys looking for churches are more attracted to churches that know who they are and where they're headed than churches that are in disarray and have no idea. There are guys who will take on churches like that and rebuild them and remake them, and they usually rebuild and remake them in their image, and God blesses that too. No worries. But more guys are attracted to churches that know who they are and they know what they're supposed to be doing. And what I love about this church is you're here a long time. This is a multi-generational church, right? Most of you in this church can think back to your moms and dads and grandparents and great-grandparents, and you have that commonality. You're engaged in your community, and you are known for your children's ministry and your youth ministry work. You are known in other parts of this state. In fact, you're going to be having summer camp in 2 weeks.
That week.
So this is preparation week, and then next week, right? That would be the second week. So there are other churches that know about this and have been sending their kids here to this place. I think that's that's a central part of your vision for how you're going to go forward. Because as public schools are beginning to let us down more and more and more, and the children that go to those public schools, the church is going to occupy a more and more and more important place in our culture, right? Yes? Everybody nod your heads and nod your one. And this church is uniquely positioned to do it because you've always done it. You're good at it. You know how to do it. And so not only am I asking you to continue to seek God seriously, but to refine and define the vision clearly. The next thing, once he's done that, he makes very careful plans. He has all the resources of the king, but the king didn't turn his whole kingdom over to him. He only has a finite amount of money. He has a finite amount of soldiers on loan from the king, and he has a finite amount of resources, and he's got to make it all work. He's going to get and have what he needs, but he's got to plan it carefully. Most of you know that most of my career I was a bivocational pastor. I owned a construction company and a woodworking business, and I was in ministry, and all at the same time. And it was supposed to be part-time for either one. Because I was young and an idiot and I had energy, I did all of them full-time all the time. And I don't know how I did that except God was with me. And I had a great woman behind me. I can tell you this, that if you're going to build a building, you don't just show up at the job site having no idea except, let's build a building. Let's just start digging a hole and see how it goes. And then we'll figure out what the foundation will be, and then we'll figure out what the shape of the building, and we'll just do it as we go. I can tell you that that's going to be a poorly built building. It will be. It has to be. It has to be well planned and well executed. And in our state, because we're getting more and more rule happy, they actually make you do it now. There's something called building inspectors now. You want to build something, the township is going to send a building inspector. And you know what he's going to want to see at the very first, before you put a shovel in the ground? He's going to want to see a set of blueprints, isn't he? And not just drawn by you. They're going to have to be done by an architect with an architect's seal on them. And they do all of this in order to charge money every time they require you to do something. That's why they really do it. But it is smart to start with a plan. And it's smart to start with a plan where things are written down. Or in this case, drawn up with exact measurements to them. So that when you start to build, you know what you're doing. You can order the stuff ahead of time and have it pre-positioned on the job site. So that when you dig the hole in the ground to an exact specification, to an exact depth, you're able to pour a foundation and the concrete block is waiting. Because next week, that's what's going to be going in. And when you're halfway through that, all the lumber is going to come and be stacked on the job and be waiting and ready. It pays to have a plan, right? You don't build anything without a plan. You don't do it in the back of an envelope. You don't do it working out of your head. You need to have a plan, and that's where this next year for this church is going to be really crucial. It's not that you have no plan right now. Your plan, and rightly so, is to look for and find a pastor to be here, to lead you, but to work together with you and to shepherd you. And from there, you will design a plan about how to implement what this church is really, really good at. And what this church is really good at, that I've noticed since October, is three things. You really care about yourself really well. You love each other. And you care about and take care of each other. You're good in children's ministry. You're good in youth ministry. Your church is really good at these things. And from that will be a plan moving forward. We good? Good. I also said to the king, if it please the king, let me have letters addressed to the governors of the province west of the Euphrates River. This is on their way back to Israel. Instructing them to let me travel safely through their territories on my way to Judah. And please give me a letter addressed to Asaph, the manager of the king's forest. This is a handy thing. This is the guy who owns the Home Depot of the area. They have all the lumber. They have all the stone they need to rebuild the walls. It's laying on the ground. But they're going to need a whole lot of lumber to rebuild gates. I told you these gates are 25 or more feet tall. They're not gates at all, they're giant doors. And they're going to need lumber for that, and lumber to build houses, and lumber to build a whole bunch of things. And he gets a letter from the guy who runs the king's forest. It's not just an outpost of a lumber yard. He's got the whole forest that he is able to make use of with the king's permission. Pretty cool, huh? No Lowe's or Home Depot for them. Please give me a letter addressed to Asaph, the manager of the king's forest, instructing him to give me timber. I will need it to make beams for the gates of the temple fortress, for the city walls, and for the house, and for myself. And the king granted these requests because the gracious hand of God was on me. None of this is happening by accident. This is all happening because Nehemiah looked around and said, somebody ought to do something about this. And God said, it's going to be you. And then somebody had to get serious about seeking God about what was going to be needed because they didn't have it. And then they had to get serious about making a plan so that they could actually carry out this impossible job. And all along the way, this looks impossible to this group of people who were, in fact, slaves from far away. They have very little in tools. They have very little in resources. They have no money, and a lot of them aren't eating as much as they ought to be able to eat. And God, because they sought him, because they sought God, God provided what they needed, when they needed it, from the people that had the resources. Not only did he ask them to seek God seriously and refine and define the vision, but they made plans carefully, but now Nehemiah inspires people passionately. Now we've got a plan. Now we know where we're headed. Let's all get on this bus and take an adventure together. Once you figure out the direction that you're going, if you can't get anybody to get on the bus with you, this thing that they want to do, the thing that you have to do, will never get done, right? If you got a pastor in here and it didn't work out and nobody wanted to get on the bus with him, it doesn't work out. If any of this seems familiar to you, let me know. I did that on purpose because, of course, it's familiar to you. Yes, you have to seek God passionately. Yes, you have to refine and to define and refine your vision. Yes, you have to plan carefully, but that leader has to be able to, with love and compassion, and yet with a firm sense of God leading, needs to be able to share that with you and make you want to get on the bus and go do that. And you're going to get that guy. You had to kiss a frog before you got to the prince, right? Okay, we all get it. We all get it. And to be kind to what happened here before, he was young and he needed more mentoring by somebody. And I'm hoping he's getting it now because he's working with Bob Jones University now. And I'm hoping somebody there will mentor that young man. So you had to kiss a frog before you got to your prince. You'll get there. God will give you what you need, and he will, together with you, refine and define the plan and the vision, and you're all going to get on the bus, and you're all going to experience the next great season of this church's life. You will. There is no guarantee that churches survive forever. Name me one of the churches from Jesus' time, the 7 churches, let's say, from the beginning of Revelation. Let's go visit those churches, shall we? You can't. You know why? They're not there. Churches are not guaranteed to last forever, but they can experience life cycles where they're at the top of their game, and then there's a decline and a little trough before things turn around and you enjoy the next great season. God is not done with this church in this place. He's not. You're not at the end of your life and your life cycle. You're getting ready to start another one. I wish we human beings had that, right? Wouldn't that be great? You're all nodding your heads, especially those of you who have hair that looks like mine. The truth is, we will. When we're done with this life, we're going to another life because of what Jesus did, where there will be no more sickness. Marie, there will be no more need to worry about our ancestry and us being back in the old country. We'll be in a new country where none of that stuff that our ancestors had to live with will be present. We'll be in the presence of Jesus forever, and we'll be given important things to do. We're not going to be floating on a cloud playing a harp. That's Hollywood. We will be given important things to do. I don't know what they are. I'm hoping in my future it involves being in a band, hiking, building things, and enjoying whatever the new heavens and the new earth are with these kinds of boots on. I don't know what he's got in mind for all the rest of you, but that's what I'm hoping. And even more. So, yeah, we have another life cycle after this one. It's a forever life cycle. And it was bought and paid for by Jesus. We're going to celebrate that in just a minute. But now I've said to them, you know very well what trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire. Let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and end this disgrace. Then I told them about how the gracious hand of God had been on me and about my conversation with the king. Who is he talking to? He's talking to the team of people that have agreed with him at the very beginning that, yeah, this place is a wreck. And now he's challenging them. Get on the bus and go on this ride. This is going to be unbelievable. I don't know how it's going to turn out. In fact, we're going to see a little bit later, there's a lot of bumpiness that's going to happen on this ride before this is over. But they're going to get there. They will get there. And now he's inspiring them. Get on the bus with me, because this is what we've agreed to, and this is the plans we've made to accomplish it. We don't know how it's going to turn out. We don't know what the future is. We don't know what kind of bumps and lumps we're going to take on the way to doing this, but we're going to commit to it. We're going to do it all together. We're all going to get on the bus. So how do I discover this good work and start doing it? This is our good work. Well, here's some things I thought about. What is in your heart? You know, people make God's will for my life really more mysterious than it actually needs to be. The first place you ought to start is what's actually in my heart. What is it that fires my engine? What is it that makes the juices flow? I can tell you for me, as a little boy, watching my dad and my uncles and my grandfather get into pickup trucks and stake body trucks and go off to work and go build things. I saw that when I was growing up. And I wanted to do it too. And as soon as I could get on the job site as a little kid, I went on Saturdays with my dad and my uncles and my grandfather. I hung out in my grandfather's shop, and I learned things growing up through that. It was already in my heart. When I was 16 years old, God got a hold of that heart, and he said, I want you to be in ministry. I said, great, sign me up. That was in my heart. What is in your heart for this place? Well, there's a lot of different answers for that, but don't ignore what God has put into your heart about what you're yearning for. Maybe it's a ministry you've never done before. Maybe it's one that you're doing now, but you could do it bigger or better. Maybe it's, I don't know what it is, but what is in your heart? Now, our thoughts and our plans and what is in our heart sometimes is not right. So whatever is in your heart that you're thinking of right in this moment, when I'm saying what's in your heart, it has to align with God's holy word. If it doesn't, stay away from it, because our hearts can lead us to the wrong places. But if what's in your heart aligns with the principles of God's word, you got a game. You got a game. I couldn't wait to get out on the job site to do all these, the grown-up big boy stuff, backhoes and digging holes in the dirt and mixing mud and laying block and pouring concrete and building buildings and then getting in the shop on my other side of the family and making the furniture that would go in the house. Isn't that cool? Isn't that cool? Yes. Well, thank you. I'm starting to feel bad about some of this. What is in your heart? Here's how Jesus said it in Matthew. Store your treasures in heaven, where moths and rust cannot destroy, and thieves do not break in and steal. Wherever your treasure is, there the desires of your heart will be. This cuts both ways. You bring the wrong things into your life, and you worship the wrong things, and you make the wrong things your God, or the wrong things your priority, or the wrong things where you spend all your time and money. You bring the wrong things into your life, that's what's going to be in your heart, and it's going to be a life not well lived. But if you bring the right things into your life, the kinds of things that God has called us to be as followers of Jesus, then the right things are stored in your heart, and the thoughts that you have in your heart about what to do will be the right things. Secondly, what is in your heart must align with God's heartbeat. So, if what is in your heart does not align with God's heartbeat, Pastor Ron, how do we know that? How do we know God's heartbeat? Read His Word. That's how we know about God. Read His Word. Let's start with some basic things. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbors as yourself. That's God's general and overall and all the time heartbeat for everybody who's ever born. Let's start there. So whatever is in your heart that you're wondering about this church doing or accomplishing or being, it must align with God's Word. So by doing that, it aligns with God's heartbeat. And we are confident that He hears us whenever we ask for anything that pleases Him. And since we know He hears us when we make our requests, we also know that He will give us what we ask for. Have you ever wondered why Jesus prayed and He got every single thing He ever prayed for? You ever wonder that? When Jesus prayed, He got every single thing that He ever prayed for. Every time, without fail. Why? Well, Pastor Ron, Jesus was God and God was Jesus, and that's why it worked. No, that's not why. He is the unique and only Son of God, but He was completely man while He was completely God's Son. So, He got what He asked for every time because He knew His dad so well that He knew what Dad wanted. So when He prayed, He knew it aligned with what Dad wanted for Him and for this world. Do you get it? It's kind of like when you were little and you say, Mom, can I have 2 more cookies? I know I just have 5. Can I have 2 more? That was not Mom's will. Dad, can I borrow the car this week? No, you can't, because the last time you brought it back with no gas, and back in the day when we had radios that had buttons, you changed all the buttons on the radio, and now it plays rock and roll stations. You're asking for things that you know that didn't align with what your parents wanted. But if you ask for things that aligned with what they wanted for you, you got it every time. The problem is we don't do that. Jesus did. This is how we do it. We are confident that He hears us whenever we ask for anything that pleases Him. And since we know He hears us when we make our requests, we also know that He will give us what we ask for because we align. So what is the burden, the desire, the dream that's yearning in your heart? Well, we don't have time to get into all that, but I want you to go home and think about it. Because it's what is going to be needed by God as the soil from which will grow whatever it is that God and your new pastor and you together are dreaming of doing. Start to dream that dream now. I don't know what it is. It could be as simple as a 5-year plan that's developed where that piece of property you have across the street, that great big field, is being used for something with a structure on it that gets used every week to God's glory in this town, and you become a powerhouse, influential in the area, somebody for something about something. I don't know. I don't know what you're yearning for, what the dreams are, but you should be dreaming and yearning for it now and letting God refine it in this process when you're looking for your people, for your new pastor. When you identify what this is, the burden you bear often reveals the difference you'll make. Have you ever noticed when somebody comes up and they gripe or complain about something or they criticize something, generally speaking, as a pastor, I'm going to look at them and say, well, somebody ought to do something about that. And I think you're it, because you're the one that identified what it is. And so in my church, people quickly came to know that if they were going to come with an observation about something or a criticism, they were probably going to be the ones that were going to have to do it. Pastor, this church ought to have a ministry for widows. This is a real situation in the church I came from last year. Pastor, we ought to have a widows ministry. There's a lot of widows in our church, and there's a lot of widows in our town. This church ought to do something. You should start something. I said, I will not. And they looked at me like, what? I said, I will not, but you will. Because you noticed. Because you're coming to me with somebody ought to do something about this. And you'd be good at it. You would really be good. I will help you. And the elders, we will pray and we'll start to resource what you need, but you're going to be the one that's going to do it. And you know what else? It's not going to be just for our widows here in our church. There's a lot of widows that live in the town that my church is in Jersey, where Terry's family lives, oddly enough. That's a funny connection. Here I am all the way out here, and you have a connection to my church and my area where I was. There's a lot of widows that live there, and you know what? They call it WOW. That's what they call it. Widows of Worth. That's what they call it. And other people in our church call it wrinkled old women. Wow. I thought that was rather unkind, and I told them so. But what they did, because I was a police chaplain in that town, is they went to Borough Hall, and they had the borough machinery crank out all of the advertising for us. And guess what? We went from having 8 or 9 widows in our church to a group of about 30 or 40 because they're coming from the town. See what I mean? See what I mean? Something as easy and simple as that. But somebody had to have the idea. And then somebody ugly had to say to her, no, I'm not going to do it, but you are. It's going to work that way here too. The burden you bear often reveals the difference you'll make. You're in a season of your life right now where you're readying for the next successful season of ministry. You're already the little engine that could. But God is readying you for whatever the next thing is. And I don't know what it is, and you don't either. So whoever's going to be serving communion with me today, would you come forward? I want to transition right to this, and I want to point this out. And those who will nicely fold this like the American flag, you can do that. I told you that we're celebrating Independence Week, and we will celebrate Independence Day this Tuesday. And for our country, it was just the beginning, right? What was left to do was everything. We come to this table, it's just the opposite. This was all that was needed to be done. When Jesus hung on the cross and he breathed his last, what did he say? Say it with me. It is finished. This represents it being done. We're celebrating a beginning in our country. All that was left to do was everything for them. Here, we approach this table today. It's all been done. It's all been done for us. And so we get to celebrate the fact that it was all done. What do I mean by all done? Everyone in this room, everyone you've ever known, everyone who's ever lived on this planet has been called, declared, judged by God as a sinner. Every single picking one of us. Everyone. And God said, you're going to have to pay for that sin. And you're going to pay for it by being separated from me for eternity. No heaven for you. Because you're going to pay for your sin with your own death. That was the declared judgment on all of God's creation. It sounds really harsh. Except that God said, I don't want it to be this way, and you have a choice. You have a choice. I'm going to send my son. He will die in your place and pay for all of your sin with his sinless life. And if you believe he did that for you, I will wipe your sin away and you can live with me forever. Now that was how the gospel was explained to me when I was a 10-year-old, a hooligan. from an Episcopal church. I didn't understand a thing except when to sit down, when to kneel down, when to stand up, when to stick out my tongue for the wafer, and when to get the sip from the big cup and have my mouth wiped. I just explained to you the gospel in very simple terms, and we're celebrating that today. It is finished. Jesus did what we needed, and you can't earn it. I can't earn it. None of us can earn it. It's been offered as a free gift. Jesus, God's unique and only Son, came all the way from heaven to do this for us. So, Glenn, would you pray for both the... Let me lift these lids and see what we have under here this time. Okay, we have the all-in-one. So, would you pray for both the cup and the bread, please?
Heavenly Father, I come to you with humble hearts at this time. Lord, it's nothing that we do that makes us worthy of this communion, Lord, but it's what you did on the cross for us. Lord, we pray that we would examine our hearts. Lord, we pray that we would come to you with an open heart. Lord, we thank you for shedding your blood and your side being pierced. Lord, that we have this redemption story, Lord, that we can share with others. Lord, pray all this in your Son's name.
Come to this table as thankful people because we have received something we could never have earned. It was given as a free gift, and it cost God his unique and only Son. He was really dead. He was really dead. And that's why you know there needed to be a Trinity. There needed to be three parts that were all the same God, so that when God the Son was killed and he really was dead, then God himself would not be dead. You get it? There had to be more. There was more. We celebrate that today. Carefully open this so you don't spill it on yourself. It's not easy. And we'll celebrate both the bread and the cup together, which is how they did it at their supper. They didn't separate those two things because they were celebrating the Jewish Passover. And Jesus kind of co-opted that and made it into an example of what we celebrate today. This wonderful time to remember his sacrifice for us. So, take the wafer, This does represent Jesus' broken body for us. He did this for us. Let us eat the bread together. Afterwards, he picked up the cup and he said, I'm going to make a brand new covenant. I'm going to make a brand new covenant, a brand new deal for mankind. And this cup will represent my blood that's going to both confirm and ratify this new covenant. I'll do it myself, and I'll offer it to you as a free gift. He did it by shedding his blood. Let's drink the cup together. Jesus, through Paul the Apostle, reported that we do this as often as we should do it until the Lord comes back. So we will keep on doing this until he comes back, or until we are translated into heaven. And the scripture says, when they did all of this at that Last Supper, they sang a hymn